In this tutorial, we'll take a look at how to create assemblies and how to use them with characters, conveyors, and cranes. So let's get started. Let's create an assembly first. And we're going to use that assembly to create another assembly so we can use hierarchical assemblies. So first, let's go and create a blueprint class. And everything that a character can pick up or interact with is usually of a type inventory item. So we call them inventory item actor. If you select that by typing inventory here, they should show up and then you'll select it. And let's call it BP, and then I'm going to call it inventory item. And this is going to be gearbox color. So if we double click that, then from the mesh component here, we'll select what the visual representation or the mesh looks like. So I'm going to select gearbox cover here. So this is how you can convert your static meshes into inventory items. Inventory items gives you abilities to select what kind of handedness to use. For example, if you want to use single hand or both hands, and what are the hands that are, where are the hands placed for dual hand or both handed setups. So I'm going to save that. And we can look into how to do hand placement for both-handed stuff. So if I open this again, so now sometimes you'll not get the full blueprint editor, which you were getting earlier. So if you close, so by clicking that button, you can get that. But if you go back here to the top of the hierarchy in the components, and then over here you can select handedness. And now since this item is slightly larger in size, we're going to make it both-handed. We're not going to use that in this tutorial, but this is just to show you if you're going to actually pick it up with hands and you want to select single hand, both hands, then this is where you do in the attachment side inside the details of this top level in the component hierarchy. So once you've done that, you can close it and you can right click and do edit tool placement for both hands. So now you will see the character, and with respect to the character, where is the mesh or where is your inventory item. So now we kind of want to turn it, and let's say we want him to hold it like so. And I'm going to move it so that it is somewhere around here. And this is where we want the character to hold it. And now we also want the character to, I'm going to move it down a bit, and want the characters to hold his hands or place his left hand over here and right hand over here. So we're going to do that. So right now you can move this, but you can see that this transform gizmo is in the local space of this hand. So we can click on this and that will be world space. So then you can move it relative to this coordinate frame. And you can click on this again and it goes to local frame again. Then you can move it in this frame. So depending on your preference, you want to choose one of them. In this case, I'd like to use global coordinates because it's easier to place the hand that way. So I'm going to do that. Select the hand, left hand, and that's where I would like it to be. Select the left hand, and this is where I would like this hand to be. Right? So now if you click this item, that is going to save that tool in part. So if I close this out, then this is our inventory item. And you also need to save this blueprint itself. So there are two saves that you need to do currently. So now we are going to create another inventory item. So I'm going to right click here, do blueprint class, and then here I'm going to type inventory item again, select inventory item, and I'm going to call it BPII gears. I'm going to open it, and in the mesh component, I'm going to select the gears mesh that I want to use. And the advantage of using this inventory items is also when you compose the assemblies, the origin is handled correctly. Now, all these origins are currently set up so that if you place all the meshes at the origin, they all assemble in the way that is desired. However, when you want to pick and move and rotate this in the world, you want these to be centered on the object, and that gets that allows you to rotate things and pick things and edit them in a more intuitive fashion, and that handles automatically for inventory items. So that's why you want to use inventory items for anything that you want to interact with, along with the requirement that the character, if the character needs to pick it up, then it needs to be an inventory item. So I'm going to save this here. This time I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to call it gears cover. And now this time again, notice that it didn't open the full editor. We actually don't need the full editor. If you scroll down, then this is where the static mesh is. And now we're going to select gears cover. So the inventory items can be created by one person in your team and can be shared across the team. Not everybody needs to create the inventory items. So one designer can create all these inventory items, and then the process planners can just use it. So they don't need to create inventory items unless they're dealing with something very specific that they need to create an inventory item or an assembly for that matter. So next, now we have these three inventory items or components of the assembly that we are going to create. So next we are going to create an assembly. So I'm again now going to create a blueprint class. And this blueprint class for an assembly can be anything, depends on how you're going to use it. In our case, since we might want it to be assembled in another assembly, then we do want it to be inventory item again. So as a rule of thumb, for a lot of your inventory, you do want it to be of inventory item actor, unless you have a very specific reason for it not to be. So I'm going to call this BPII again. That's the naming convention I'm using. You can choose any naming convention you'd like. And then this is Gearbox Assembly. So if I open this up, then here I can add, now I'm going to create an assembly in this case. So this I'm not going to assign directly a mesh to it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to add those three inventory items that I created into this assembly as in subassembly. So we're going to choose subassembly here, subtype sub, and then you see this MC subassembly component. And let's call this gear, I'm going to call it subassembly gearbox cover. And from here, you can just pick your gearbox cover inventory item, and then you can put that here into the assembly class. So, or from here you can choose and you can type gearbox cover as well. And then there's the first one that we created right over here. So we'll duplicate this. The next one is gears, and I'm going to duplicate this again. And the next is gears cover. So here, now let's do gears. And let's do gears cover for this one. So this is how these all the assemblies are, or sub-assemblies in this case, are assembled into a full assembly. And if these don't happen to be correctly aligned of how you expect it to be, sometimes that happens, then you want to click on Snap to Shade Origin. That makes them so that they get aligned properly to their desired or the location that has been set by the origin. So I'm going to just save this out. And we are going to create one more assembly. And this time, let's create a non-inventory item type, just to show that you can use those as well in specific cases. For our case, we're going to use that on the conveyor. So the conveyor is going to spawn platturns. On the plattern, we're going to create an engine assembly. So the plattern itself, since we're not going to be interacting with character, the plattern is just going to be on the conveyor. So we can choose in that case for it to not be an inventory item actor. And that's the example that I'm going to show next. So let's create a blueprint class. And this time we can just merely create an actor class. And then we're going to call it BP plattern. I'm going to call it demo engine plattern so that I can find it easier if I need to look it from a drop down. So we're going to open this, and then let's create a mesh component here, or static mesh component, because we want a mesh for the base of our plattern. So let's see if we have one here. I believe we do. So yes, here, engine plattern. So this is going to be the base of our plattern, and everything on top of it is going to be an assembly. So so the engine, there's going to be, let's say we want an engine block, and then on that we want to assemble our gearbox assembly. So let's create assembly here, and we'll call it engine. I'm going to call it engine as assembly, or just subassembly engine. So now if this is how we want it to work, what we will need to do is actually create an engine assembly. Or we could duplicate this, and then we'll create a gearbox assembly here. So there are two ways to handle this. So one was that you can create that as this assembly inside the engine assembly, so all of that is a single assembly, or you can just from here now choose your gearbox assembly, which we have over here. So if I bring that over here, and then you'll see that shows up over here. So now I can place my engine block here. So let's show this approach, and I'll show the other one as well. So let's create another inventory item for our engine block. So I'm going to call it inventory item, or let's let's just duplicate this instead. So I'm going to call it engine block, and then scroll too much here. I'm going to choose engine block. So I'm going to find the mesh that I want, which is this. I'm going to save that. So now we have that engine block here. We can bring it here. And then basically this is the assembly that we want to assemble. So if you want to move your pattern right now, or these with respect to the pattern, you can do that. Like let's say we want to place it over here. So that's fine. And then we're going to save this. So now in our case, what we want to do is when the things start showing up on conveyor. Now this conveyor could be coming from somewhere else where the engine block is already placed. And you'll notice that there's this assembled Boolean here. So if you click on that, what happens is that whenever an item of this type demo engine pattern gets created or spawned, then the engine block will already be assembled. That means it will be visible. And then gearbox assembly is not assembled, so it won't be visible. And this will become more clear once we start using it. So this is how you create assemblies. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this tutorial here, and this is the entirety of how you create and use assemblies. Create assemblies specifically, and in the next tutorial I'm going to cover more about how you use the how you use the assemblies both with characters and with conveyors and cranes.